Hello, this is the Reynolds, and this is our story. We're going to continue with our docu-series. I can't believe it's already number 6. In telling of our story, I do have a tendency to go ahead of myself, but I want to tell this story as accurate as possible. In the last episode, I spoke of the vision that has stayed imprinted upon my mind unto this very day. The graphic detail of our encounter with the demonic powers of darkness, and to be able to watch how the power of God has invested in us and is able to help us to overcome these forces of hell and be able to defeat our enemy. For greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. Now, before I get into the story of the revival that came to Pago Pago, I want to fill in some details about some of the different ministers that visited and some that spent time ministering in America Samoa. As I mentioned before, my father came with the Pickleshimers, MC and Barbara, and this was 1960. Of course, the Reynolds family came in December of 1963. Then the Singing Spears came for a few months, and after that, it was W.E. Davis and his wife that were appointed. And it must have been around 1966, and they were there through 1969. My father and mother, after deputation, came about mid-1970 with my wife and I, with our 2 oldest children, Jonathan and Deborah. Actually, we came in 69. Mom and Dad came a little later. The Don Dobbins family came in 1972, and I don't know the exact year, but the Dobbins daughter was married to Homer D. Compton from Arizona, and I know they came to America Samoa and helped Brother and Sister Dobbins for a period of time. It was during this time that John Wolfram and his wife came to our islands and spent a year trying to start another work in America Samoa. I believe that he had tried to start something there in Whangatongo, which was the main town there on the island. John told me later that he wasn't successful in starting something there. He was frustrated. He said after a year went by, John said, I gave up, and I notified the missions department. I just told him, I said, Samoans couldn't be saved. But how wrong he was. You know, you just, if you're going to work somewhere for God, you need a call. You need to go where God brings you. And Brother Wolfram was so wrong. God had many, many Samoans that he had already chosen that were going to be a part of the glorious kingdom. When the Dobbins left, they turned the church in Lepuapua over to Chief Atofau, who became the pastor for a few years. The chief's nephew, Lali, we called him Lali Sopi at that time, became the pastor, and he pastored our church in Lepuapua for a few years. I guess it must have been 1986, 1987, and that the Lord began to deal with me about returning to Samoa. We were pastoring a home missions church in Chandler, Arizona, but I felt like it was time to make our way back to the islands. We found a pastor for our work in Arizona, and in the meantime, we bought a motor home and we set out on our journey finding PIMs. But when we got to Oregon, my wife's family who lived there begged us to start a church. And we baptized many of her cousins, her aunt. We bought a church building from the Church of God of Prophecy, and we started a home missions church in Staten, Oregon. So our plans to return to Samoa was interrupted for a spell. But the call of Samoa was still strong in our hearts. I told how we got a phone call from Samoa one day in 1989 that opened the door for us to return back to the islands. So after moving to America Samoa in February of 1990, we had taken over the work in November of 1989 and moved there permanently in February of 1990. So began the revival that we had anticipated. And it was during this time that the Sherrys came. They had been in the Fiji Islands, and they spent a few weeks with us. And while they were here, their son, who's now an appointed missionary, received the Holy Ghost while they were with us there in Lepuapua. Not long after the Sherrys left, Brother Carl Varnell and his wife came and stayed with us. They told us, Brother Reynolds, the purpose of our visit was to inform you that UPCI was no longer going to support a missionary in America Samoa. They told us that we were on our own. Of course, we had support. Our church that we were pastoring there supported us completely. They had also planned to go to Tonga and close down the work there, but God had other plans. They could not get a flight to Tonga, so Brother and Sister Varnell asked us if they could just stay there with us for a couple of weeks. We were tickled to have them. We were glad that they stayed because we put them to work. I had him working, preaching, and teaching, and what a blessing they were. Tonga wasn't closed down, and the work goes on there to this very day. And when the Blunts came to Samoa, they were also appointed to work in the Tonga Islands. The missionaries to China, Brother and Sister Arthur, came and spent a couple weeks with us, preaching and teaching, and they were a real blessing to our church. It was during this time that we went 14 months without a break. I guess it was after the Varnell's report at headquarters on the work going on in America Samoa that headquarters changed their mind about Samoa. So it was around 1995 that the Blunts began to visit our island. They were looking for a place where they could work for God. The Blunts stayed with us. They even took care of our church a number of times when we were off island. They had been appointed to Fiji, but things didn't work out for them there. It was during this time that I received a call from Brother Harry Sissom, who was the UPCI Foreign Missions Director at the time. Brother Sissom called and he asked me if it would be all right for the Blunts to come to Samoa and work with us. We had a church in Western Samoa that needed a pastor. We had a building, so I told him if Brother and Sister Blunt would come and work with us, we would welcome them to come. So they received an appointment, and as I mentioned in a previous broadcast, they reopened the Vaivasi Church in Western Samoa. I went there and spent a couple of weeks with the Blunts. I introduced them to the members of the congregation that we had, and I also went to the house of the chief that owned that property there and told him, I said, we need our building. He said, well, it's yours, Pastor Reynolds. We'll clean it out. And so there we began once again the church at Vaivasi. The church is a revival church, and it's no longer in Vaivasi, and it's pastored by one of my sons in the Lord. And they had to relocate the church to the village of Sinamonga, and we recently preached a 3-day revival there, and what a powerful move of God. There was a total of 6 churches in the islands, 2 in America Samoa, 4 in Samoa, which includes Upolu and the island of Savaii. Now, let's get back to the narrative of Pago Pago. This is a story that is filled with excitement and thrill of watching God work. And boy, did he work with us. I must tell you, When we had to leave Pupua, I was having a hard time understanding what God was doing. But I'm so thankful that God doesn't leave us in the dark about these things. In the middle of this dilemma, the Lord gave me a night vision. And I tell you, it is amazing how this works. In this vision, I was in a desert with cactus and sand and sage, and there were snakes. I remember seeing a lot of snakes. And I knew they were very dangerous. And as we were walking along, I told my wife and daughter, I warned them, I said, don't touch these things, they're dangerous. They looked like they were just laying there and not moving around very much. But I knew that we could not get near them or touch them. But as we were walking along, I suddenly came upon a place where there was an old donkey lying on its side. And I could see, I thought it's dead, because I could see the bones showing in its rib cage. And I said to myself, well, the old prospector is dead. But before I could walk on by, that old donkey lifted its head and asked me to come and help it up. So I went over to it and I helped it to its feet. Then it said to me, we need to get out of here. This is a dangerous place. So off we went, not knowing where we would go. When I woke up from that vision, that night vision, I lay for a long time trying to figure out what it meant. At this time, we were still working in Lepupua before we had to leave. What I realized later, it was after Chief Atofau died, that this donkey represented the church, and the prospector had been Chief Atofau. For Chief Atofau was truly a prospector that wanted the church to survive. So though the church had suffered nearly a fatal blow, it wasn't dead yet. And the church had to move on to its next location. And that's what brought us to Pago Pago, which is the capital village of America Samoa. I will be detailing the many things we encountered with the opening of the church in Pago Pago. So please stay tuned as this story unfolds. God bless you.